Okay.
Yep.
Okay. One of the things again that we need to understand is that Israel operates 4 interrogation centres, 3 detention centres, and 17 prisons. Okay. However, and I want to emphasise the importance of the prisons. Under international law, the occupying power cannot transfer the occupied population outside of occupied territory. However, Israel, out of the 17 prisons that it operates, only 1 is in the West Bank, is in Palestine. The rest are inside 48, inside Israel. And why is this important? I mean, this is important for 2 main reasons. Number 1, it's illegal under international law, as I said. As I just said, you can't transfer the occupied population outside. But number 2 is the practical consequences of having the prisons inside 48. Why? Because when family members want to visit their families in prison, they have to rely on a permit, with entry permit or security permit, which number 1 is very, very difficult to get, but number 2 Israel uses as a means of putting pressure on families, etc., to become collaborators on things like this. And this is a really, really important issue when we talk about the prisons. I mean, here at Adamir, we're always trying to link into the boycott, divestment, sanctions. I mean, from internationally, it's probably the primary tool that can work. So we try to link into the G4S campaign. G4S, for those who don't know, G4S is the largest security or military company in the world. Operates in 120, 130 countries all over the world. But here in Palestine, it's complicit in the Israeli occupation and in the settlements and the checkpoints, but also the prisons. So it provides. So Ofer, for example, the main prison that we outside Ramallah, it would provide the perimeter security, the internal security, etc. So we and they also provide the security for many of the prisons where the administrative detainees are held. So this is one way of trying to link Palestinian political prisoners to the broader BDS campaign. And the G4S campaign has really, it's really gaining momentum, and hopefully will gain even more momentum. Let me just talk about children. We mentioned women just briefly, but let me just talk about children, because obviously children are so important, and they're a vulnerable group in themselves. And increasingly we're seeing children being targeted again and again and again for a number of different reasons. And particularly we see this in villages or community that are resisting the wall, the apartheid wall, in Nabi Sal and Nilin, etc. But also in other places in Jerusalem and Silwan and things like this. And why are they being targeted? They've been targeted for a number of different reasons. Number 1 is that the Israelis want to, deter them from taking part in the demonstrations. This is number 1. But what we're seeing more and more is that the children are being targeted, and they're brought in for interrogation. Again, the usual procedure. They'll be arrested during the night. They'll be brought in, and they will be interrogated, coerced, ill-treated, and in many cases tortured into giving a confession in a language that they don't understand, Hebrew, and that confession will then be used against the adult leadership of the popular committees, or any of those committees that are resisting the confiscation or the colonization of their land. And we're seeing this more and more and more. We've seen only recently where we had 27 school children arrested on their way to school in Hebron, where we had children as young as 6 years of age arrested. I mean, the situation for children is really terrible. And I mean, if you're a child, there's obviously a big difference between a child and an adult. For a child, if you spend 2 hours, it might seem not like a long time, but if you spend 2 hours under Israeli interrogation, it'll have an impact on you. I mean, and the psychological consequences of that are immense. Okay, so let me just talk maybe about the hunger strikes that have been ongoing since the second half of 2011. And basically the hunger strikes have been going on and reached their peak at one point during 2012. We had about 2,000 Palestinian political prisoners on hunger strike. Now, this hunger strike, the mass hunger strike, came to an end, surprise, surprise, on the 14th of May 2012. And why I say surprise, surprise is the day after is 15th of May 2012 was Nakba Day, and the Israelis obviously didn't want protests going on around around Palestine with 2,000 political prisoners on hunger strike. I mean, the dogs on the street could have predicted that something was going to happen. So this agreement was made up of a number of different elements. Number one, there was supposed to be an improvement in prison conditions. Number two was the end of isolation as a policy. Number three was that administrative detention would only be used in exceptional circumstances, just like it's meant to be under international law. The fourth was the reinstatement of education, which had been taken away after the arrest of the Israeli soldier in Gaza by the Palestinian resistance. And number five was the renewal of family visits for Gaza prisoners. Now, that was in May 2012. Fast forward to the middle of April 2013. Out of the 5 elements of the agreements that Israel made with the prisoners, Israel has reneged on 4. The only element of the agreements that Israel has honoured has been the resumption of family visits for Gaza prisoners. Prison conditions have continued. Isolation is still being used as a policy, even though there's a lot less. Administrative detention is obviously still been used like it has before. Education hasn't been reinstated. And this obviously sounds alarm bells for us at Addameer. And why? I always use the example of my own country in Ireland, where in 1981 we lost 10 IRA volunteers, after years where the British government refused to honour the agreements that they made with the prisoners and basically pushed the prisoners into a corner where they ended up 10 came out in body bags. Is that a situation, or is that the direction we're going here in Palestine? I mean, it's possible. It's quite possible. I mean, if you push someone into a corner and you limit their option, they're only going to come out fighting. And for prisoners, a hunger strike is their last weapon, their only weapon. I mean, the hunger strikes have continued, and they still continue. We still have 3 hunger strikes at the moment, but we're heading for a very, very dark place. I mean, it's very short-sighted. In my opinion, it's very short-sighted from the Israelis, and from the international community and their Western backers, in the sense that nobody knows the reaction on the Palestinian street if one hunger striker dies. I mean, we look at the ongoing protests, popular protests around Palestine. We look in 2013 alone. In a couple of weeks ago, we had the death of a prisoner who died of cancer. In February, we had another death of a prisoner who died of torture. And then in January, at the beginning of the year, we had another prisoner who died 10 days after being released as a result of medical neglect. So in 3 months, we've had 2 prisoners die of medical neglect and 1 of torture. This is only in 2013. And I think, as I said, it's very short-sighted with the Israelis, because the Israelis, number one, they can't predict what's going to happen on the outside, but it suits Israel. I mean, the status quo suits Israel. As every day goes by, and as every day that we continue to talk about this imaginary peace process, as every day that passes, it only benefits Israel, because it will continue with its colonization and the occupation that pleases it. I mean, so that's just a brief background on the hunger strikes. What I can do is I can talk to you finally to tell you maybe a little bit about Addameer. Okay, so Addameer, as I said at the beginning, we're a Palestinian human rights organisation that defends and supports Palestinian political prisoners. And we've been doing so for the last 20 years. We do a number of different things. So we provide free legal aid to Palestinian political prisoners and their families. So we represent them in courts, in both within Israeli courts and Palestinian Authority courts. We document violations against their prisoners and detainees and their families, and then we do local and international advocacy. I mean, even though we're a relatively small organisation, we have a huge amount of support, and we're really supportive of the support that we have internationally in terms of the solidarity movements around the world. We also work within the UN system. We would make regular submissions to the, for example, the special rapporteurs on human rights defenders, the working group on arbitrary detention, etc. And then we work at EU level, and then at individual state level in the diplomatic community, etc. here in Palestine. We're also part of the Palestinian Council of Human Rights Organisations, which is 11 different human rights organisations in Palestine, and we do a lot of advocacy on different issues with them. And we also have a training unit, so we train we train law students in the Israeli military court system, and we train at different universities in Palestine, and then we also train lawyers again in the Israeli military court system. This is just a very quick overview of what Addameer does and the work that it's involved in. Now, let me just talk about Israel's reaction to Addameer and the work that we do, and I'll move backwards. Okay, so since the last 20 years, Israel has always been targeted by, Addameer has always been targeted by the Israelis in different forms. Why? Because we're very vocal, we're very prominent, and we advocate on behalf of all Palestinian political prisoners, and Israel sees us as a threat. Now, how does Israel deal with a threat? Through the only thing it knows, violence. So if we look back in a couple of months ago, in December, the middle of December 2012, we ourselves had a visit by the Israelis where they came in the middle of the night, smashed in the door, ransacked our offices, stole our computers, presumed they took everything off our server, and disappeared into the night. I mean, this is the last thing that happened in December. In October 2012, as I said, we had our researcher Ayman Nasser, who spent 45 days in interrogation, and now is in the middle of a so-called trial in the Israeli military courts. If we go back to August 2012, our chairperson has been banned from travelling from Jerusalem to the rest of the West Bank, banned from travelling internationally. And we also have a number of our staff who are banned from travelling to Jerusalem, to 48 internationally. We've also had our lawyers banned. We actually, at the moment, we have our lawyers banned from visiting two of the hunger strikers, and this happens before in the middle of 2012. And this is the environment that Addameer operates. I mean, it's a difficult situation. We know. For example, the Israelis, tap our phones and this type of thing, and they'll try to intimidate the work that we do. But number one, it doesn't stop it, and number two, it'll just make us work harder. So I think the Israelis can try all they want, but they'll never succeed.